how a man robbed an entire bank using 16 pills.
Still clinging to consciousness. A woman drags herself out of her office and collapses onto the street, crying for help. A police officer arrives on scene. What he finds lying on the floor of the bank are 12 bodies. This had been his third attempt in the last 3 months, and he finally succeeded. He was equipped with no weapons, just one business card and a handful of pills. What followed was the deadliest bank heist in history, led by one evil
What did he sell,
mastermind.
16 pills? Or did he slip it to them? Interesting.
At 3:20 p.m., Yoshida Takejiro, the manager of the Tokyo branch of the Teikoko Imperial Bank, started toward the front entrance to lock up after a long day. Moments before he was able to shut the doors, a man wearing a loose-fitting white coat over a brown suit slid his foot in the door. The man claimed to be an officer with the Japanese Welfare Department and pointed to an armband to prove it. He carried a small leather case, reminiscent of a doctor's bag. He bowed respectfully and introduced himself as Dr. Yamaguchi Jiro, saying that he was there on orders from General MacArthur's headquarters, the commander of the United States occupying force in Japan after the end of the Second World War. Yamaguchi told the manager
this is a
that
good
his
story
office
he's putting
was
on.
concerned about an epidemic of dysentery in the neighborhood, and he was there to inoculate everyone against the infection. Yoshida called all 14 other employees and one of their children who was at the bank that day into a bank office where Yamaguchi explained that everyone needed to take 2 sets of meds. The first was a pill, and the second was a liquid medication he poured into everyone's teacups. He was insistent that the second set of medication would need to be taken immediately after the first. He told everyone that the drug was very potent,
Kinda weird,
and
but
they
okay.
should be careful not to let it touch their teeth, and to just stick out their tongue a little. The doctor then took out a large bottle from his bag and
Even
poured
weirder.
a dose for each person there, mixing the substance with some tea. He shouted, "Dozo," meaning go ahead, and everyone downed their mixture. Some of the people began to cough violently, but he told them that the second dose would help them find relief. He poured more of the liquid into their cups, and they quickly drank it. One of the employees complained that their throat was burning and asked if they could gargle some water. Everyone hurried to a water fountain, but before they could get a drink, Nichimura Hideko, one of the accountants, collapsed. He fell to the floor, his eyes glazing over. Another employee, Takeuchi Misako, bolted for the manager's office, but her body gave way and she crashed to the floor as well.
I present to thee Lord Grill.
This minister's straight snuck in and slipped the whole crew a nice brew. Okay.
Gallus, I've been out hard now thanks to today's sponsor, Established Titles. Glad
Titles?
to meet ye.
Established Titles is based on
Oh wow, now that's exciting.
Meatbags will kneel before me, kneel in despair.
Around them, the rest of the bank employees fell to the
coffee
ground,
pot has
thrashing
lost the
in
plot.
pain. Wasting no
He's
time,
crazy.
Yamaguchi strolled over to a counter and shoveled as much cash as he could get into his bag, around 164,000 yen, and a check for
How
about
much is that?
17,400 yen, the equivalent of a little over 7,000 US dollars today. Takeuchi, still clinging to consciousness, dragged herself from the back office to the front
7
door,
spins,
where she
not bad.
collapsed out into the street, crying for help.
Not
A
bad.
police officer heard her calls and arrived on the scene moments later to find what was later described as a battlefield. 12 hellishly still, slowly cooling bodies lay strewn across the floor of the bank, frozen in a tableau of terror. Of the 16 who took Yamaguchi's medicine, only 3 survived. The trio were immediately taken to the hospital, where their stomachs were pumped and given antidotes. Despite their terrible condition, they all survived.
Oh,
Upon
shit.
investigation of the teacups Yamaguchi poured the medicine into, forensic investigators found traces of potassium cyanide, a deadly poison. In the end, 12 people died, including
they were
a young
poisoned.
child, marking the incident as the deadliest mass killing in Japanese history for the next 40 years. In the following days, Officer Ohori, investigating the incident, found the same man had gone to 2 other banks leading up to the mass killing. 3 months prior to the Teikoko incident, a man calling himself Matsui Shigeru, claiming to be from the Ministry of Health and Welfare Prevention Bureau, showed up at the Yasuda Bank's Ibara branch right at closing time, giving the bank manager the same spiel about inoculation. There were 18
So this is
people
just the
inside
guy's
the
shtick.
bank at the time.
See,
and all
that's why I
18
said it a second ago. It sounded like a good backstory because it sounded just like made up. Like that just sounded too good to be true. Man had a whole story going on.
drank the mixture. Fortunately, the poison was too weak and no one was harmed.
Oh.
Another attempt, this
Nice.
time at the Bank of Tokyo's Mitsubishi branch, failed as well. A man with a business card for Dr. Jiro Yamaguchi arrived, saying he needed to disinfect the bank and give all the employees some medicine. The bank manager was skeptical, but before they could find out more, Yamaguchi-san had already fled. Witness testimonies showed police that it
Oh, he
was
got
clear
sniffed
that
out that
Dr.
time.
Matsui and Dr. Yamaguchi were the same person. They described him as a middle-aged man with a scar on his chin and a mole on his left cheek. Japanese culture puts great emphasis on the trading of business cards. There are many rules of etiquette, and it's considered rude not to give one out to everyone you meet in a business setting. So, the man claiming to be Dr. Yamaguchi and Dr. Matsui gave out business cards to help corroborate his identity. Police didn't know who he was, but his assumed identities were a good place to start. Not long after they began pursuing this line of inquiry, they discovered that Dr. Jiro Yamaguchi was a total fabrication, and the business card was created at a shop in Ginza, a neighborhood in Tokyo. Dr. Matsui, on the other hand,
Straight
was a
traced
real
it back to
person,
the
and he
beginning.
lived in Sendai.
Goddamn.
Lucky for him, he was a well-known member of the community and was far from Tokyo at the time of the mass killing. The real Dr. Matsui had a rock-solid alibi. However, this was still a major break in the case for the investigators looking into the incident. Police found that the good doctor had recently printed a set of 100 business cards and had traded away 96 of them in recent weeks. And since the killer had to have met him in order to get their hands on his business cards, he had to be among those 96. The police then found the identities of the people that Dr. Matsui had given business cards to.
They traced
and
back
slowly,
what?
one by one,
They
went
traced
down their
all
list,
back
checking
in
off
96?
anyone that had an alibi the day of the killing. Before long, authorities had managed to account for the locations
crazy.
of all but one of the people on their list, an artist named Hirasawa Sadamichi. Speaking with the authorities, Dr. Matsui recalled meeting Hirasawa on a ferry on the way to Hokkaido. However, police couldn't find any trace of the man, save for the records that his home in Tokyo had caught fire twice under mysterious circumstances. Investigators went to speak with Hirasawa
Lightning?
at his home, but he wasn't there. His wife told them that her husband
Candles?
had gone to Otaru City to be with his parents who were very sick at
What
the
could
time.
cause the fire?
However, when police tracked down Hirasawa in Otaru City, they were surprised to find his parents in a perfect bill of health. Asking Hirasawa what he was doing the day of the killing, he told them that he was traveling to the Mitsubishi exhibition to meet with President Oshima of the Oshima Land Company to sell him a painting. Officers asked Hirasawa about his meeting with Dr. Matsui, to which he replied, "Of course I remember Dr. Matsui. We exchanged cards while on the ferry to Hokkaido." At this time, officers also noted that Hirasawa had a mole on his left cheek and a scar under his chin.
Oh.
They asked him if they could give him Dr. Matsui's card, but Hirasawa told them that he'd been robbed by a pickpocketer not long after he met the doctor, and no longer had the card. A check had been stolen from the
Coincidence.
bank the day of the killing, and
What a
had been
coincidence.
cashed the day following. Investigators watching Hirasawa's home posed as various workers, including delivery drivers, repairmen, and bill collectors in order to get a sample of the artist's handwriting. Comparing the handwriting between Hirasawa's clandestine signature and the signature on the check, a handwriting expert determined that they were written with the same hand. Not only that, but the police also found that Hirasawa gave his wife 80,000 yen shortly after the killing, and his bank account showed a deposit of 44,000.
Oh, not the bank account.
Despite
Oh,
the
man.
fact that only days earlier, Hirasawa and his wife were asking friends for loans. When police questioned him about the money, he told them that it came to him from from the sales of paintings and gifts from wealthy patrons. However,
Surely.
when police asked around to see
Right.
who
That makes
Hirasawa
sense.
had sold paintings to, they found that he had only sold enough to make about 100,000 yen. Where did the rest of the money come from? By August, Inspector Ohori had had enough. With the missing business card, the mysterious deposits, and the lack of a solid alibi, he arrested Hirasawa and began the prosecution process. Police raided the artist's home and found a brown suit and a leather bag similar to the one the killer had on his person. Moreover, 2 of the survivors identified Hirasawa as the murderer, but witnesses of other incidents could not confirm. Police grilled Hirasawa, who was unable to explain the contradictions in his story. Eventually, he capitulated and admitted his guilt. "You are right, I am the man," he said. The people inside the Teikoko Bank were given
just
potassium
owned up to it.
cyanide.
Okay.
But what is it exactly? Cyanide is a naturally
I
occurring
mean, he was pretty
chemical
much
that
cut.
can be found
Might
in
as
many
well.
plants, including cassava, lima beans, almonds, and the pits of some fruits like apricots, apples, and peaches. It's a common poison that's been used in warfare and, well, regular old murder for thousands of years. Cyanide can exist in a gaseous form as hydrogen cyanide and cyanide chloride, or in a crystallized form as sodium cyanide and potassium cyanide. Regardless of the form, if you come into contact with it, you're gonna have a bad time. The most common cause of cyanide poisoning is actually smoke inhalation from house fires, and it's also released in cigarette smoke. Hydrogen cyanide is a byproduct of burning tobacco in an oxygen-deficient environment. So tack that down as one of the 10 billion reasons not to smoke. Cyanide affects the central nervous system and your cardiovascular systems. A lethal dose of cyanide gas will kill in seconds,
As if
while
you needed
salts
another
lead to
reason.
a death in minutes. If you've been exposed to a lethal dose, you likely don't have time to notice the effects. That said, this is what you should look out for if you had a less than lethal exposure. Central nervous system symptoms include headaches, anxiety, confusion, lethargy, seizures, and a coma. Cardiovascular symptoms include a slowed heart rate, followed by a rapid heart rate, low blood pressure, and trouble breathing. Survivors of cyanide poisoning occasionally develop Parkinson's disease and other neurological disorders. Treatments always begin with removing exposure. In some cases, this includes removing clothing and diligently washing skin with soap. If it's been ingested, then activated charcoal may be used, which binds to many drugs and toxins. Cyanide kills by preventing cells from using oxygen. It does this by going into your mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell as we're legally required to call it, and binds to a portion of a molecule called cytochrome oxidase.
It's like the one thing I remember
the next
from
step
school.
for medical staff
They really
is to
drilled that
prevent
in
or
my head.
reverse this process. First is the use of a cyanide antidote kit, which uses a 3-component process of amyl nitrate, sodium nitrate, and sodium thiosulfate to pull cyanide away from your cells by giving it a more attractive binder. The second method uses hydroxycobalamin, a manufactured version of vitamin B12 that also contains cobalt, which, like our first method, provides a stronger bind for cyanide, turning it into cyanocobalamin, which the body can then pass out
Making it
via
more
urine.
lethal?
Shortly after Hirasawa confessed, he recanted his confession and claimed a defense of partial insanity. But this wasn't enough to keep Japanese courts from sentencing him to death by hanging. Hirasawa's lawyers were
he did
smart,
kill
however, and argued that
more
the
than a
Japanese
dozen people.
Constitution forbade individuals from taking their own lives, and hanging
crazy.
technically fell under the purview of self-strangulation, therefore he could not be executed. Hirasawa spent the remaining 32 years of his life as a death row inmate, writing an autobiography titled My Will, The Teikoko Bank Case, and continued to produce art. In 1981, his lawyers argued for his release, saying that the death penalty had a 30-year statute of limitations. But the courts refuted the argument, saying that the statute only applied to situations where death row inmates had escaped, evading capture for 30 years. Hirasawa died on May 10, 1987, at the age of 95 of pneumonia in a prison hospital. This didn't stop his supporters from trying to clear his name. By 2003, they'd made 19 separate appeals for retrial to the Tokyo High Court, and they were all denied. There were issues in the case that contributed to Hirasawa's widespread support. During the original trial, he had claimed that his confession was coerced, taken by use of brutal, non-stop interrogation and torture. His lawyers argued eyewitness testimony could not be trusted, as only 2 of 40 witnesses actually identified him, and they had become more unsure of that as the trial went on. The only hard evidence connecting Hirasawa to the robbery was the business card that the killer left in the bank.
The business card.
But police didn't bother following up on his claim of pickpocketing. Not only that, Hirasawa's 2 sons-in-law told police that he was playing cards with them at the time of the massacre, though this alibi was thrown out. However, his daughter also claimed that he was unable to see his son-in-law and instead visited her home, staying there until 3:30, but this testimony was ultimately thrown out as well. It has also been alleged by his supporters that the money deposited into Hirasawa's bank account and the money he gave to his wife was obtained through the sale of explicit paintings, which he wouldn't have admitted to the police. Another theory.
Now this is just getting like a crazy messy situation. Everyone's taking this in such a different direction.
From a Tokyo prison to an unheated detention house in Miyagi, where supporters claim the judges hoped he would die of natural causes. One judge said of the decision, if their hearts were in it, they could have read the record and signed the death warrant long ago. But they were afraid, and I would be too. Cases like these often come attached with conspiracy theories, and the Teikoko Bank case is no exception. Many claim a link between Hirasawa and a clandestine Imperial Japanese chemical and biological warfare group, Unit 731.
I mean, at first it didn't seem pretty solid that it was just him whenever they found the briefcase and the jacket and him not having the card, but maybe these conspiracy theories are right. I don't know. I wasn't there. The thing that kind of throws it off too is the whole witness thing. He said only 2 out of the 40 or something like that.
Research conducted
That's
in
not a lot.
internment camps in
Kinda
Manchuria
crazy.
during the war. Takehiko, Hirasawa's adopted son, claimed that the police found that the poison used in the robbery was complex beyond the ability for his father to produce, and that the 2-step process was the signature of Unit 731. U.S. journalist William Triplett, in his book Flowering of the Bamboo, claims to have found hard evidence to corroborate the connection between the killing and this military R&D group. A memo from General MacArthur's office that police were pursuing leads concerning personnel who attended or were employed during the war years on a secret army chemical laboratory, though nothing has been confirmed. Supporters argue that money to the sum of 180,000 yen was left behind at the bank, which wouldn't make sense if the intent was robbery. They argue that the excess money proves that it could not be Hirasawa, who was strapped for cash. To this day, Hirasawa's name still remains tethered to this horrible crime. Whether he did it beyond a shadow of a doubt or if there are possible culprits is beyond our ability to confirm now. The judges in this case clearly weren't willing to make that final decision about capital punishment, and much of the ethical and philosophical discourse surrounding the death penalty hinges on whether or not we can execute people knowing that we and the justice systems we've built make mistakes sometimes. Is it moral to put someone to death when there is even the slightest possibility they could be innocent? Can we build a justice system that never punishes the wrong person?
No, this has always been a problem in hard. It's
never exploited or
interesting conversation.
It just goes to show that things are usually much more complicated than we want them to be. Sometimes the truth is a tough pill to swallow.
True.
Is that one too dark?
Kind of, but it's true. And informative. Or a good reminder that, yeah, sometimes there's like several sides of the story. And sometimes we don't always get the truth. Kind of weird.